Hi everyone, this is just a quick video taking a look at question 5 for paper 2 for English language, writer's viewpoints and perspectives. So through this video we're going to be taking a look at one of the hardest questions and seeing how we can approach it in an effective manner. Look at the statements below and decide if it is something we do always, sometimes or never. So for number 1 then, use De Forest techniques for paper 2 question 5. Number 2, use an exclamation mark at the end of a sentence. Number 3, only spend 20 minutes on question 5. Number 4, complete all questions on the English exam paper. Question 5, read back through my work and check for errors in spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now if you want to think about these questions in a bit more depth, please feel free to do so. We're now going to jump ahead and look through the right answers in the next part. Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So for number 1, when we use De Forest techniques for paper 2, we're going to say always. So these are fundamental techniques that you need for non-fiction writing, so it's really important that you use these for question 5. Number 2, use an exclamation mark at the end of a sentence. So the answer would be sometimes for this one, and the reason is because we can also use things like a question mark and also a full stop as well. Number 3, only spend 20 minutes on question 5. This is something we should never do. You should spend at least 45 minutes on this question because it is that important. It is worth 40 marks, so it's really important that you spend at least 45 minutes on this question. Number 4, complete all questions on the English exam paper. Now, you should always make sure that you do every single question. Missing out one question may be the difference between you achieving or missing out on your target grade. And then number 5, read back through your work and check for errors in spelling, punctuation and grammar. So I'd say always do this, especially when you think about question 5. We have 16 marks for technical accuracy, and remember that's almost a quarter of the marks for paper 1. So think very carefully when you're thinking about these things. It's also a quarter of the marks for paper 2, so bear that in mind as well. Okay. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to understand how to construct an effective piece of transactional writing and apply your understanding to write your own response. Look at the exam question and attempt the challenges that follow. So it says then, young people are dangerous when they first learn to drive. The legal age to drive should be extended to the age of 21. Write a letter to the Department of Transport to express your views on this statement. And you can see there that it is 40 marks. Now whenever you're faced with a question like this, the first thing to think about is can you actually break it down and identify the TAP of the exam question. Now what we mean by this is the topic, the audience and the purpose, and it's a really good thing to do because a lot of the time it can be quite long-winded. So if we think about some of the key words then, first of all you have this statement. We have young people and they're dangerous. They learn to drive. The legal age should be extended to 21. So those are just a few of the key words. That would be the topic. The audience would be the Department of Transport, and that's going to help us to decide what kind of mood or tone our writing is going to take. And then the purpose is to express your views on the statement. So you can go pros and cons, you can go good things, bad things, it's entirely up to you. It's asking you to actually express your own views, so you do have a bit more freedom with this kind of question. The next thing to think about is, can you recall the acronym that you need for question 5? Now if you're not sure what I mean by an acronym is a word that is made up of some of the key letters of some of the techniques that we need to use. Okay, so if you're not too sure what I mean by that, don't worry about it, we'll go through it in the next part now. And the final one is, can you come up with 3 or more strong points to make in response to the question? So speed is always the name of the game in the assessment. Can you come up with the 3 ideas as quick as you can to actually make sure you can answer the question effectively? So first of all then, what are De Forest techniques and why are they important? So with De Forest then we have an acronym, and to break it down, the first one stands for direct address. Now different teachers have different varieties on this, so it could also stand for discourse markers. I'll use direct address because with direct address you're talking directly to the audience, so it's quite an effective tool to use. So we'll look at an example of that a little bit later on as well. Next comes the A, which would be alliteration. Then we have fact, opinion, rhetorical question, repetition, emotive language, statistics, and a triplet or a rule of three. Now, these aren't the only techniques that you need to know. These are just some of the fundamental ones that we need to be aware of for paper 2. So a lot of the time when you're thinking about things like question 3 and question 4, these are going to be the kind of techniques that you'll need to identify. And then when it comes to question 5, it will be, can you apply your understanding of these techniques to perform your own piece of written text? That's feedback. Check your understanding against the answers below. So what we're going to think about now is all the kind of feedback we need to know regarding the question and how to attempt it properly. So here's our TAP. So just to recap them, it will be young drivers and dangerous driving is the topic. Our audience is the Department of Transport, and the purpose is to express your own point of view. Now the acronym again is DeForest. This is a really good thing to use when you're writing your actual response. Hopefully by the time you come to do your question 5, you will know all of these techniques off by heart, and you won't need to write them all down like this. Simply writing down each letter that they stand for will be fantastic, and just tick them off as you go through, and that's going to help you to actually keep track of the techniques that you've used. Now for my 3 ideas, I've just picked 3 random thoughts that came into my head based on the question. So when it comes to writing this yourself, have a think. Maybe some of these work well for you, maybe you choose to do something different. Okay, so just have a look and see what you think. So for the first one, I've said rather than changing the age, why don't you think about making the test harder? So if we're blaming young people for all of these road accidents, maybe it's not actually their fault, maybe the tests are at fault, maybe we should make them a little bit harder. My second idea would be, young people are more cautious than some older people. So what we want to avoid here is coming off as being too biased. Now it's all well and good saying that there are some young people that are dangerous drivers, but you could easily argue that there are people in their 70s and their 80s that are also dangerous behind the wheel of the car as well. And the final one, rather than actually banning people from getting a driving license at such a young age, why don't we support young people by teaching driving skills and safety while they're at school and in college? Now this is an interesting thing to think about, this final point, because if you take a country like America for example, in America they do let the students or the young people actually start driving at a much younger age. So have a think over the information and see which ones you can use when we approach the question. Now one of the key things to remember with this one as well is also asked you to write a letter. So what we're going to look through now is just a basic overview of how to structure a letter. So here we have the basic kind of layout for a letter. You've got your date, sender's address, which means your address, and the recipient's address, which is the person you're sending it to. Now a few things to remember when you're going through this, first of all, would be just make sure that you're not using your own address. Make up the information, because we don't want you to be using your own details or anything like that. The address needs to use capital letters for nouns and also for the postcode. And finally, remember to use the correct salutations. So for example, if it's formal or informal, that's going to dictate how we actually start our writing. So make sure you feel confident with the organisational features surrounding how to write a letter, because this is going to be very important when you actually write your response. Look at the student response and take the challenges that follow. So it says then, Dear Sir, the ability to drive is a basic right for all that dedicates their time, money and effort in learning and understanding how to drive properly. Teenagers are often responsible, so the idea of raising the age limit is just stupid. I mean, what kind of a moron thought of that? If you really cared about young people's driving, you would make sure we learn how to drive sooner. Listen mate, let me get straight to the point. You need to stop blaming young people for all the bad drivers out there. So the first thing to think about here is, has it actually been written in the form of a letter? And if we look, even though it's used Dear Sir and it is writing underneath where we'd expect it to carry on the writing, it hasn't actually used any of the address or any of the typical organisational features you'd expect. Now if we think about the super challenge, identify anything that's positive or negative of the response. It's always easiest to focus on the negative things, unfortunately, so we're going to think about that to start off with. So the ability to drive is a basic right for all that dedicates their time, money and effort in learning and understanding how to drive properly. Right, that's fine. Teenagers are often responsible, so the idea of raising the age limit is just stupid. So this is a word we want to try and avoid. It sounds a little bit aggressive and it might get the wrong impression to the person that's reading it. We also have words like moron, and we have a lot of colloquial language or slang language here where it says mate. So these are things that we want to avoid. However, there are some things that work well in this response, and it's important to note with our writing, it's not always it's going to be bad. Sometimes there are good parts, but it's about identifying which bits need to be improved as you go through. So we've got a nice little group of 3 here, dedicate their time, money and effort in learning and understanding how to drive. So you got a nice triplet or group of 3 to start off with. Teenagers are often responsible, so the idea of the age limit is just stupid. I mean, what kind of a moron thought of that? We've got our rhetorical question. You got direct address with you. If you really cared about young people's driving, you would make sure we learn how to drive sooner. Listen mate, let me get straight to the point. You need to stop blaming young people for all the bad drivers out there. So there's a lot of good ideas within this one. We just need to think about how can you actually improve it, use some more techniques, and think about what the tone is saying to the actual audience as well. Remember, if this is a formal letter that we're writing, you have to sound formal in your writing as well. So the fact that they're using words like stupid, mate, or moron is not going to have the right impact on the actual person you're writing to. So the next thing we need to think about is how can you take this response, improve it, and start writing the rest of the paragraph. So in total we'd have 5 paragraphs for our question 5. And the way we're going to do this, we're going to think about planning out our DeForest techniques. So for each one of the words within the actual DeForest acronym, we're going to try and come up with a sentence for each one. Now you don't have to do this in the exam, but it's just a really good exercise to start thinking about the kind of things you can include to get a decent mark. So for the first one, direct address, you need to understand the needs of young people. So because we're using the word you, it will count as direct address. Secondly, alliteration, which is where we repeat the same letter 2 or more times, so young drivers can be horrible and horrendous when driving. Next one is a fact. It is a fact that people over the age of 70 are a risk on the roads. Opinion. I think, or I believe, teenagers are the worst people on the earth. So the reason why I've included the 2 options there is if you want to make sure you're definitely expressing your opinion, these are basic phrases you can use to allow the examiner to know that you've actually used an opinion. Next one then is a rhetorical question. How can we neglect young people in that way? This is actually a really good example because the word neglect is actually emotive language as well. It means that we're doing them a disservice, we're not helping them, we're not supporting them. So it's quite an emotive word in that sense as well. The next one is repetition. We can't restrict young people, and I've just put there ×2, and that's to help me remember that I might use this, let's say, in my first paragraph, and then I might use it again in my third or my second paragraph as well to make sure I'm getting the repetition. Emotive language. Teenagers suffer if they're not allowed to drive, so that word suffer is incredibly emotive as well. S is our statistics. 80% of teenagers are crazy. It's not the truth, but you can kind of make up your own statistics and use them towards your own goals, right? Obviously that isn't true, but we're just thinking about the kind of things you can use to help support your argument in your writing. The final one is a triplet. Young people are wild, reckless, and a menace behind the wheel. So think about how you can have 3 ideas towards a common goal. It could be good or it could be bad. So it could easily have said that young people are thoughtful, caring, and always look to improve their community or something like that, if you want to have a more positive slant on it, for example. Now the idea is that we use a few of these sentences to start our writing to get us thinking about, have we actually used these techniques? How would it actually affect our writing overall as well? Look back at the exam question and attempt the challenges that follow. So again, just to recap, it says young people are dangerous when they first learn to drive. The legal age to drive should be extended to the age of 21. Write a letter to the Department of Transport to express your views on this statement. So if you're going to go and have an attempt at this, which I really encourage you to do so, especially if you're thinking about the build up to the exams now, is to try and plan 3 main ideas to form the main paragraphs in your writing. Write your response using a range of deforest techniques. Now, if we use a range of techniques, that gets us up into the higher bound of the mark scheme. And the mega challenge, build on the example response that we looked at earlier and make your own attempts for question 5. If you need any additional help or support, the new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, leave us a comment below, like and subscribe, or check out our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks ever so much for listening, guys, and if you haven't done so already, please could you like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye bye.